Right, hello, hi everyone. Thank you for coming, and welcome to the next in our much sought after series of Routes to Success webinars. So as you know, these are a bunch of lottery funded sort of webinars and podcasts that are aimed at supporting youth workers with sort of professional development and learning new things during the COVID crisis. So I'm Kevin, I'm a Workforce Development Officer for the MYA. And the host of the webinar today is Sarah Tiffany, and I'll let her introduce herself in a sec once I've got rid of the formalities. Today's webinar is on rural youth work. Just some housekeeping. The housekeeping now we're on Zoom is a lot more straightforward than it normally is. I mean, if you have a fire in your own home, I suggest you get out, but you know, we're not responsible for that. What I would like you to do though is before you go today, there will be an evaluation form posted up in the chat. Now, if you leave the room, then you won't be able to access that. So before you go, I'd like you, if you could click on that and open it, then you're able to leave the webinar and fill in the evaluation form at your leisure. We do need the evaluation forms, partly because we use them, and partly because they're part of our monitoring for the National Lottery who funded this. We want to get more money to be able to do more of these sort of things. So we do need to be able to report. So good, that's me. I'll stop eating into Sarah's time. It's wonderful to see you all. And I hope you have a useful and enjoyable webinar. Thanks very much. Over to you, Sarah.
Well, thanks, Kev. Hello, everybody. So welcome to today's training. It's nice to see you all. It's lovely to be here and to talk about something I'm quite passionate about. Can we, all I'll say to you as well, just building on Kev's little bit of housekeeping, if you can turn your cameras on, please do, just so that I know that you're participating. I know people may have problems with cameras. If you've got any young people in the background or any children at home, please feel free to turn them off. You don't need to put your hand up to go to the toilet. You're more than welcome to go off and do what you need to do. If you know the Amazon person comes to the door, go ahead, do it. We're all in strange times at the minute. So my name's Sarah Tiffany and I am one of the youth work specialists for the National Youth Agency. And I've been asked to deliver this today by Kev. Just to give you a little bit of background for me, I was a rural youth worker for many years. I've also been a young person who has grown up in a rural community. So I do understand the beauty around rural youth work. I do understand the beauty around being a young person in that environment as well. So bear with me while I just share my screen, guys. 1 second. We haven't got too many of us today. So the beauty of that is that we can actually, let me have a look. We can actually introduce ourselves and where we're from. So if you would like to, I'd really like to hear about you, where you're from and the kind of youth work that you deliver. So if we can start with Tony, that would be wonderful.
Okay, thank you. My name's Tony Bundy. I'm actually a social worker by background with a long history of working in various fields. That did include at one point managing young offender services, which is where my original interest comes from. I work occasionally for the Care Quality Commission now, and that has included work with young people. My main interest in joining these series of seminars is I'm the Labour and Cooperative candidate for the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Police and Crime Commissioner with the elections in May. So I'm trying to broaden and revisit some of my past experience and knowledge and make sure it's up to date. Hampshire being quite a rural county, so there's almost a crime prevention interest to me joining this one.
Fabulous, thank you very much, Debs.
Hi, so my name's Debs Carter and I run a small youth project in a rural market town in Norfolk, and I have done for the last 10 years and for a small local charity. Previous to that, I've done a variety of things. I've worked for local government, I've worked with young people, people with learning disabilities, children, a whole variety for the YMCA and for local government. Yeah, so quite a broad experience. And yeah, I'm just really interested in what you've got to say today, and excited to be able to access some training and for personal development, because as many people appreciate, if you're working for a small charity, you don't often get these kind of opportunities, and certainly for free. So yeah, thank you so much for doing this, because I'm really grateful.
That's great input. Thanks, Deb. Neil?
Hello, so yes, I'm Neil. I've been involved in youth work forever, but basically on a voluntary basis. But 3.5 years ago, I decided to go to uni, and I qualified in the summer as a professional youth worker. I run my own community interest company, and now that I've finished uni, I want to be starting to focus on two major projects to introduce youth work and a community centre in two areas, one in Nottingham, one in Leicester, both of which are not rural, but I'm particularly interested in rural work because I think there's opportunities for partnership and working with clubs that perhaps are a bit further afield, and why can't we link up with those clubs? So be interesting to see what this session has to offer. And see how I can build opportunities for partnership into the work that I'm beginning to plan.
Fabulous, thank you. Mary Jane?
Yeah, I'm the Youth Engagement Officer for the North York Moors National Park Authority. So my background is in youth work in the Teesside, East Durham area, Tees Valley as well, and then an outdoor instructor. I then was really fortunate to get the job at the national parks, and now my role is to work with young people in and around the park, to bring them to the national park, learn all about it, why it's important to look after it. But whilst doing that, they're also learning dynamic skills which are slowly getting lost, unfortunately, as academic is sort of seen as a higher priority. And they just learn lots of skills from sort of the confidence building, teamwork, the usual sort of thing. But we are also sort of really looking at the mental health side of it and self-reflection. So we are working towards the different levels of the social return on investment certificate. We do have level 1 already, and we've done, on some of the work that we do, we've done some questionnaires and other things with young people. So every pound of it funding, we get £6 return, very much on mental health side of things. But we more look forward to the stories, the case studies that we get from it, rather than that figure. But funders like that bit. So yeah, that's what I get up to.
Fabulous, thank you very much. Who have we got next? Rosie?
Hi, my name's Rosie. I'm the programme manager for youth work at an organisation called the Kite Trust. We are a charity that supports LGBTQ+ young people across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough and surrounding areas, going into Suffolk and Norfolk and parts of Hertfordshire as well. And we are interested in rural youth work. We've not done a lot of detached youth work, and we've found that through lockdown, we almost eliminated the rural isolation problem that we had with young people not being able to attend our groups in person, but they were able to attend online. And we don't want to lose or disengage with those young people when we go back to face-to-face stuff. So quite keen in that context. My background is in social movement charities, doing youth work in the Woodcraft folk. I was also an outdoor instructor at one point, but generally I do mental health related support work.
Fabulous, thank you. Charis?
Hi, I'm Charisse.
Right.
I'm currently studying youth and community work in Cardiff, and I'm a approved foster carer as well, so I think this will really gain some experience for me.
Fabulous. And is it Ellery? We've got someone there. Okay, right then guys. Okay, so thank you very much for sharing. And we're going to get on with the webinar now. So if I can ask you all to pop yourselves on mute. There will be some parts where I want you to, we're going to pop you into breakout rooms to have some professional discussions as well, and then feedback to the group. And there's going to be some parts where I'm presenting as well. So just bear with me guys. Hopefully the technology will be with me today, because sometimes it's not. So we've done that. We've talked about the code of conduct. Go off to the toilet if you need to do. Turn your cameras off if you need a break. please, you don't need to let me know. In terms of the chat, we do have a chat going. What I'll say to you is for the last 5 minutes, there will be an opportunity to ask any questions. So if you do want to save it for them, we can have a conversation around that. Any questions that I can't answer, what I can do is give out my email address at the end, and we can have some conversations around that afterwards, and I can go and find out that information if I haven't got it for you. Okay, so that all sound good? Fantastic. Okay, so in terms of your learning outcomes today then, guys, it's going to be to gain knowledge around rural youth work, to understand which types of youth work take place in rural settings, to explore the challenges that young people face in rural settings, to explore the challenges and opportunities for youth work in rural settings, to understand the impact of county lines in rural communities, to explore how we can, as a sector, can ensure that young people in rural communities are having their needs met during the COVID pandemic and are not being isolated any further. Okay then, so I've got this little quote, and this quote comes from Children and Young People Now. It says, a life in the countryside might seem attractive, but young people often miss out on activities. Andrea Wren finds out how rural youth workers can help, downshifting for a simple life in the country, of country air and Wellington boots may be the aspiration of many adults, but for young people growing up in the sticks, it can mean boredom and isolation, having to get up early to catch the bus at school, relying on parents for lifts, and not being able to just pop round to your friends' houses, and just some of the hassles living in rural communities. As I've said before, I was a young person growing up in a rural community, and that inspired me to be a youth worker. That's why I'm where I am today. There was absolutely nothing for me growing up in terms of activities. There were no youth clubs in my area. If I needed to access any kind of provisions, I needed to travel into the next local town, and I'm from rural North Warwickshire. Bus times were every hour plus, cost of transport was high, and young people were they were the villains within the local community at that point, because we were hanging around in groups. So I decided that I wanted to be a youth worker, and I decided to take my experience as a young person and use that in terms of going into my career and what I wanted to do. So in terms of which type of youth work takes place in rural settings then, so I want you to add to this list from your experiences as well. So if I've forgotten anything off this list, so in rural settings now, there is a lot more youth work going on, but still is not as much as there will be in urban communities. So the types of youth work that happens in rural settings are detached work, some centre-based youth work, volunteer-led youth work, uniform groups, and targeted youth work. Can you think of any other forms of youth work that happen within rural settings from your experiences, guys? Rosie, you talked to me about some youth work.
Sports clubs.
Sorry?
Sports clubs.
Sports clubs, yeah. Anything else? In terms of targeted, is there much targeted youth work that happens within rural communities?
We certainly do some mentoring work, one-to-one mentoring, and we also do quite a bit of intergenerational stuff as well. Yeah,
quite often in terms of creating kind of volunteer projects for young people also. Oh, I've got something in the chat, 1 second. Let's have a look. It's really difficult to see. Youth voice as well. That's great to see that youth voice is happening in rural communities. Fantastic. So there are different modes of youth work that are happening in rural communities that we know about. Sorry, my PowerPoint's frozen again. Completely. Give it a moment, it will catch up. So in terms of the challenges for young people then, so there is limited transport provision sometimes, or households who own a car within certain rural communities. For example, this is from the Youth Work Inquiry final report that was constructed by the NYA. So in terms of this is about a visit to rural Lincolnshire. So for example, on a site visit to Lincolnshire, the parents of attendees at the Showroom Youth Centre explained to us that in the neighbouring village of Wester Mine, there was no bus service after 6 p.m. and therefore children were reliant on parents providing lifts. So if young people are marginalised anyway, living in rural communities and are struggling in terms of the access to transport as well, is sometimes a struggle. So young people really do struggle in terms of getting to other provisions. We've got a comment in the chat. We do some youth work experience, rural skills in the national park, giving them new skills for rural jobs. Fantastic. Young people really do struggle to access centre-based youth work if it's not going on in their local communities, in terms of the high cost of transport, and it can be difficult for young people to access transport in terms of being able to financially be able to access that as well. So the challenges for young people then within rural communities. So we've got limited access to functional broadband. Now, this is something that we take quite literally at the moment, that everybody has access to broadband. In your experience as youth workers, have all your young people in your room, those working in rural communities, got access to broadband? What kind of feedback have you had from families and young people around this?
We, lots of our rural young people don't have access to broadband, or if they do, they have one laptop or computer to share between the family. So when we do our online youth groups at 5 o'clock, because it's quite a young group, so we want to do an early one before dinner, parents have still not finished working from home, and so just having one device, despite the fact that they did have broadband, was tricky. And like I say, many of our young people didn't have broadband or a data plan on their phones in order to access via an app instead.
Yeah, and I know there's a big push at the moment with EE, and they're offering free broadband for families, but is it accessible for people? If you haven't already got the broadband to access it, to be able to get that free on your phone, then how are you going to access that and know that it's there, because it's not being advertised fully on the phones, right? So that can be a challenge for young people, particularly in the COVID pandemic. Youth groups can be a wide range, and they can be run by local volunteers, which sometimes could be the friend of a young person, could be their mum's friend, could be somebody that the families don't get on. It can be a bit of a challenge in terms of that, and people worry that people are going to talk to each other. Communities can be quite insular. There can be quite negative images of young people. There can be positive images of young people also. So it's sometimes not always. It can be an area that's affluent or more socially deprived. When we think about rural communities as well, people often think about rural communities just being, like I've said, in rural North Warwickshire where I live, just fields, cows, that kind of thing. But I spoke to a young person actually yesterday, because I knew I was delivering this, and that's a young person that lives, that is a friend of my family, and lives in rural Cornwall, who lives by the sea. And our immediate reaction is, oh, there's so much to do. But actually that young person was saying to me, in terms of me accessing college post 16, in terms of me accessing anything in terms of youth groups or anything to do, I've got to go on the bus for an hour. And that really scares me, because I've actually got autism and I'm really struggling with that. And that's something that's a real barrier for me. So we quite often think of young people in rural communities out in the sticks, but we don't think about those young people that, are in seaside environments as well. It can be an area that's affluent or more socially deprived as well. So within rural North Warwickshire, within the community that I was working in, half of the village was affluent and half of the village was socially deprived. So we had groups of young people that were experiencing very different things in their life, very different barriers. So some of the young people that were in less affluent homes had the struggle for clothes, food, and weren't wearing the same things, whereas some of the young people that were in the more affluent homes, their parents weren't around and there weren't a lot of people to talk to. So it was about a very different, but they were coming together. So it was shared experiences in different ways, and it was about channeling the youth work in order to meet the needs individually of those young people. Everyone knows each other, even youth work volunteers in rural communities. Everybody talks, everybody seems to know each other. So there can be a little bit of mistrust for young people within rural communities, just in case their auntie finds out, or the local person that's volunteering can be their auntie, and actually that would stop them from accessing that service even though they wanted to be there. Parents travelling long distances for work, resulting in young people being at home alone for long periods of time, can be a struggle for young people. There could be also a lack of employment opportunities in the area, resulting in financial struggles where parents are actually at home all the time and they're struggling with their mental health. Young people have talked about nowhere to go, no one to listen, and quite often a lack of services that young people are able to access. And also something that the young people that I worked with, really struggled with was a limited access to sexual health and drug and alcohol services. Because they were out in a rural environment, they needed the money to get on the bus, which was £5.65 return, which is quite a lot, to get into the local town in order to be able to access any drug and alcohol support, to be able to access condoms, pregnancy tests, chlamydia testing, anything in terms of that. So that was a real challenge for young people in that area. And if you brought those services in and those services were happening within a rural area, who would be delivering that service? Would it be the local volunteer and that they knew? If there was a local shop and they needed to get a condom, some condoms, would they need to go into the local shop and be served by their auntie or their neighbour or someone if it was quite a small area? So those are some of the challenges that young people talked about, how that they were facing. So in terms of the challenges and opportunities for youth work in a rural context, then I'll talk about the lack of trained youth workers. So this is another quote that we've got from our Youth Work Inquiry final report from the NYA. So as we look to end austerity in the 2019 Comprehensive Spending Review, what is needed is not simply more investment in youth services, but a clearer understanding for greater access to quality youth work provision. So this report builds on government's civil society strategy, building a future society that works for all, which recognises the transformational impact that youth services and trained youth workers can have, especially for young people facing multiple barriers. So in terms of the multiple barriers that young people face then in rural communities, we've talked about, access to transport. We've talked about access to sexual health service. So there's a real call for trained, qualified youth workers within those environments. And quite often, the groups that are set up can be smaller groups, faith groups, uniform groups for young people, but we do have some trained youth workers. But there's a real call to have more qualified youth workers within local communities. So in terms of your communities then, and the rural communities that you work in, Debs, I'm going to talk to you about your organisation. Tell me a little bit more about your organisation and your rural community and your charity.
Yeah, so our charity is a social action charity. It's a faith-based social action charity that was set up by a local church, but with the express intention of meeting the social action needs separately from the work that the church does. So it's like sister organisations, because people can get a little bit confused when it's a church-based only. So the work that I do, I'm a community youth worker. We have youth workers in the church as well, but I'm not a church youth worker, I'm a community youth worker. So and we when the church, I wasn't a part of it then, but when the church moved into the town that we're in, which is a town of about 10,000 people in rural Norfolk, but it's one of the towns that the government is expanding, so we've had a massive amount of development and it's due to expand and double in size. So that's a challenge as well, because the infrastructure isn't really there to manage that particularly. And certainly in terms of youth work, there was no real youth work kind of happening in a, apart from obviously the very traditional and really great uniform stuff like the guides and brownies and scouts and all of those kind of stuff that are very well supported and invested in, and they do a great work. But one of the things that was very quickly identified was that there was nothing for young people to do. So basically the charity started with doing needs-led. All of the stuff we do tends to be needs-led, very much from finding out what's going on for young people and what their needs are, and trying to meet those needs. So we have I guess one of the benefits of being a small organisation is that we can be really flexible. And we're here for the long term, I think. While obviously we're dependent on funding, because we're very volunteer heavy, but we've got a very strong volunteer base. We are quite fortunate in that respect, that we can be confident that we're here for the long term, which makes a really big difference to kind of the quality of what you do. And so we started, our bread and butter was detached youth work, and we still do that now. And everything else kind of came out of that. So 10 years, well, it started over 10 years ago. I've been involved for 10 years, but we've developed we run a community drama, youth drama project. We partner with the local sixth form to deliver a volunteering programme. We do one-to-one mentoring, and that very much comes out of the relationship that we have with the young people that we support in other areas. We do some work with girls, so we recognised quite soon that there wasn't a great deal, and this is a really big rural issue, I think, that there wasn't a great deal of support for girls in terms of the stuff that was going on for them. So we created a project called Girls Lounge, which is an after-school drop-in for girls to come and talk about the things that were important to them. But we also did a transitional one. So we work at year 6 in the local school in the summer for those girls that are transitioning, because I guess we started very much at the time when money was being taken away from youth services. The National Youth Service was just kind of starting to become non-existent. And so we were playing into a space that was absent of anyone else, really. So that's been a challenge, but also a real privilege, because we've been able to shape things. And we've had a massive amount of favour in terms of the relationships that we've got with young people. So we very soon after the detached work started doing a regular weekly drop-in, and very much picking up a lot of the young people that you've kind of described. And at that particular point, it was a lot of boys from 14 to 18 who were kind of on the edge of the community, really. The police knew a lot about them, and we just opened a drop-in and kind of welcomed them in on a weekly basis. And we were probably I guess for most of the time when we were seeing that particular cohort, we were their significant adult in their lives. Yeah, and that was an interesting period, because having to kind of negotiate that with the police, who have a very different remit around how they manage young people. But it was also an enormous privilege, because we still see some of those guys now. I bumped into one, we were doing detached last Friday, and one pulled up in his car with his 3-month-old baby, and I haven't seen him for a while, but he was one of the first that I worked with when I started, and he was 14. So I think that's one of the privileges of working in a rural small community. You're right, you do know people, and that puts an extra pressure on kind of your reputation, because you can have one bad encounter and that can take a really long time potentially to come back from. So yeah, I think that we're aware of that pressure, but we also see it as a huge privilege as well, because we're able to invest for the long term, really. I don't know if that answers your question. I've kind of waffled quite a lot, but
no, that was brilliant.
Gives you a bit of a flavour of some of the stuff we do.
Really good insight, and you've brought up some really good points. I actually, the young people that I worked with initially started working with in rural communities are now adults in the same way. I was lecturing at a college, and one of them walked in as a colleague at one point, which was absolutely amazing, and that was from my young women's work that I work with. But I think there's a massive loss of LGBTQ plus work going on in rural communities as well. There isn't any going on, a lot going on in rural communities, is there? Particularly when sometimes it starts from faith-based work, and young people feel that that's a barrier for them and they struggle, but actually it shouldn't be. And you know, there's a lot of work in terms of around young teen pregnancy, young people, you know, in terms of sexual health as well, that's missing within rural communities, and young people need to travel in order to access that outside of their communities, where actually the need for trained youth workers within their communities is huge, because actually those youth workers could be addressing that within their communities. And volunteers, that's what's fantastic about the NYA bursary scheme, isn't it, moving forward, that actually there are going to be more qualified youth workers out there, and volunteers can get involved in that. And actually, for me, that's quite exciting, particularly in rural communities, that's accessible and that training is accessible for them. So yeah, thank you very much for that. That was really good. Okay, so in terms of the challenges then, I'm going to share some of the challenges that I've had, but then I want you to share some of the challenges with me as well. So we're focused on the challenges, but we are going to focus on opportunities as well. So challenges, funding can be a challenge. Debs, you talked about it earlier on, in terms of training is a real challenge. To get that training for youth workers can be a challenge, but obviously, you know, keep looking on NYA sites. We do lots and lots of little online courses as well that you can take part in around detached work, etc. Trust within communities can sometimes be a challenge, whether they trust you as a youth worker, whether young people trust you, whether the community see you as the do-gooder, I was called back in the day, trying to work with young people and work with the police to break down those barriers between young people and police, and to break down those negative images of young people in parts of the community. There were some real positive images of young people, and actually bringing them together was great, but actually that was a real challenge at the time. Community indoor spaces can be limited, that, you know, lots of outdoor space, access to functional broadband, we've talked about that and why that's a barrier. Negative images of young people can be a barrier, but the ability to work with community member and getting to work with a community volunteer is usually something that you really want to use to your advantage, because that community member is going to be the person that knows everybody. There's going to be the person that can give you an insight into where the best places are going to go to, because not all of us are from the communities that we actually work in as well. County lines can be a challenge in rural communities because it's often overlooked and not addressed enough. I remember going to the National Gangs Conference many years ago, and someone saying to me, and saying that I was working in rural North Warwickshire, and them saying to me, "What are you doing here? Surely you don't have any problems with that, with young people in gangs in your area." Sure, rural North Warwickshire is actually quite right next to Coventry, not far from Birmingham. You know, there are routes. In terms of county lines, we are right in the centre in terms of getting on trains. You know, county lines is known in the area. A lack of up-to-date research around rural youth work as well. Even writing this for this, you know, trying to get some information for you guys out there, there really isn't that much past 2010 in terms of the information that's out there. There's not enough. So actually, the research will enable us to work better with young people, enable us to know what's going on. And assumptions that areas are affluent or low income, they're either one or the other. Actually, in rural communities, there can be a divide in that same community, that half is affluent and half isn't. So there's a real assumption when workers go in that this is the way it is. Okay, so now we've had a look at that, what I'm going to do is going to pop you into, well, I say I'm going to do, I've got a lovely assistant called Stephen in the background who's wonderful, who's going to pop you into a breakout room. And what we're going to discuss are further challenges for youth work in rural context. So I've given you some challenges there, but I want you to discuss any further any challenges, and then we're going to bring it back to the room and discuss it. Okay, so you'll have a little notice come up on your screen, and just press join and you'll go into a breakout room, guys. Okay, Stephen. Okay then, guys, so I've put you into breakout rooms and I've asked you to discuss further challenges for youth work in rural areas. So from your kind of experience, your opinion, things that you've experienced as a practitioner, so in breakout room 1, I had Gemma, Hayley, Mary Jane, Rosie and Tony. And then breakout room 2, I had Debs, Alri, Neil, and it was, remind me how to pronounce your name again because I don't want to be rude. Was it Cherry? I don't know if you're listening.
She's on a phone call, I think.
Oh, is she?
Charisse.
Charisse, fabulous. Right, okay then. So from breakout room 1 then, with Gemma, Hayley, Mary Jane, Rosie and Tony, have you got somebody that's going to speak for you as well, or are you all going to add a little bit in? What were your experiences? So think about the further challenges for youth work in a rural context. Is there anybody that wants to feed back to me?
Yeah, I'll jump in.
Fabulous.
We echoed what you had said about everybody knowing everybody, and how, from my point of view, working with LGBTQ plus young people, that can be an additional challenge. If you're a young teenager trying to work out who you are, but not knowing that, not being able to go to the service that is designed to support you through that journey because it's run by somebody that you know, that you don't want them to know that that's the sort of thing you're thinking about. That's really tricky. We can sometimes struggle to get into schools as well. So sometimes in rural areas, we are reliant on the young people reaching out to us, which often they won't do if they think that there's any chance that we're going to tell their family or that somebody else is going to find out. So it wasn't particularly a further challenge, but definitely to echo what you just said about everyone knowing everyone.
It's a really good point about getting into schools as well. I think it's a challenge sometimes for youth workers to get in schools in general, isn't it? Not just in rural communities. and particularly for young people that could probably look online around information around any kind of subject that they were struggling with in terms of sexuality or sexual health or anything like that, and actually they've got no access to any kind of internet or a decent internet, or it's shared with family and one computer. That is a real challenge, isn't it, for young people, and a real barrier, and a real struggle. And the assumptions and sometimes the labels that are given to young people in general in a rural community, that can be really intensified, because actually it's so insular that you're seeing the same people when you're coming home from school. Some young people are travelling to and from school on a bus together, and they've got to see, and if there's any kind of bullying as well going on, not just in LGBTQ plus communities, but for young people in general, you know, and it's very, even if you go into the local shop, you know, young people use the same shops quite often in rural communities as well. So it can be a real difficulty for young people that are struggling, and young people that may dress differently in rural communities also. In wider communities, in cities, it's a little bit different, but if you don't all dress the same in a rural community, the young people that I spoke to, that was a real struggle because you were an outcast. Or if you look a bit different to other young people, well, you look manly, therefore you must be gay. You look in this way, therefore you must be into this kind of music. So that's a real struggle for young people in terms of their own identity and finding out who they are. So that was a really good point, Rosie, thank you. Any more from that group? Anything else that you discussed?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Yeah, there's a couple of points on my part for working in a rural area. Is I've got all these amazing sort of activities and sessions that young people can get, well, hopefully get to, but the barrier for us is the adults bringing them to the park, not appreciating what these young people could do. And a lot of the sessions that we do offer are youth-led, that we've come up with them with young people. So it's not just me trying to figure out what young people want either. And then the second point was more the geographical location. So the North York Moors, for instance, where I work, that is mostly North Yorkshire County Council. And the major council in that area is Scarborough. But Scarborough town has got its own issues. Why would it want to deal with what's happening sort of an hour and a half's drive away? So that's a large issue as well. So
in terms of the barriers. Yes, thank you. Okay, then breakout room 2. Who we had Debs, Auri, anybody else? I don't know if anybody's still on calls, or is there anything further that we want to add from that group?
So we talked a little bit about the barrier of schools, which you've mentioned, because that's something that I've experienced, and it just takes a really long time, and it's about relationship. You have to have a relationship with a key person and then you're in. But I think something that I didn't mention in our group, but that's just kind of clicked in my brain, is generational challenges. When you're working in rural communities, you often come up against families that have lived there for a really long time, and that can be a strength, but it can also be a challenge as well. Just that there's a lot of things that young people can feel stuck in because generationally it's always been that way. And so communities can struggle to be progressive because of that.
Absolutely.
And I think as well that Neil summed it up right at the end in our group when he said a lot of the challenges that young people have in rural communities are actually the challenges that youth workers have. So it is that, you know, the access to just all of the things that you talked about earlier that actually can be just really problematic. And I think one of the challenges that I face for me as a youth worker is the lack of networking culture and opportunities as an isolated small organisation here to be connected with others just from a point of view of good practice and personal development. Those kind of things can be hugely problematic. We know that young people themselves can struggle with that, but actually as a youth working organisation we can struggle with that lack of just, you know, we haven't got another youth work organisation around the corner that we can kind of borrow people from or just chat to, and actually they have their own challenges. So we're kind of all head down getting on with what we're doing to find the time and justification to be able to invest in building relationships with someone you only see once a month is actually really quite hard work. So, and I think just aspirational poverty is something that I come across a lot in the work that I do. just because there aren't the opportunities. So the aspirations are affected by the lack of opportunity. We're an hour and a half away from London, but we might as well be a universe away from London in many respects where we are, just because it happens for them, but not for us. And you can end up actually as a youth worker having that mindset as well. So I think it's, yeah, and small town politics. I think Mary Jane talked a little bit about that in terms of Scarborough, and we would definitely experience the same thing. And we're in the same town as the politics that's happening, but actually a lot of their attention can be very much around the infrastructure. Or are we sorting the potholes out or the dog poo bins? But youth work, unless you've got people on the town council who are really passionate about young people, and that isn't anything that's on a job description. They don't have to have a town council that's representative of their community. They should, but they don't. And so unless you've got someone that's really passionate and able to really challenge old ways of thinking and stereotypes and just raise those questions and be potentially quite problematic within that town council, you're fighting a losing battle a lot to even get heard, because it's not a priority for them. And I get that, but that is a challenge.
Yeah, and I did giggle at the dog poo situation, because actually I am still in the local community that I worked in many years ago and grew up in as well. And on our there's a ward page on Facebook, so that everybody's in, and a young person was photographed having not picked some dog poo up yesterday, and which people were very, very vocal around this dog poo issue that this young person has stepped over. They were probably embarrassed to pick the dog poo up. I mean, come on. They were probably really embarrassed just in case one of their friends saw them, right? But focusing on that, and I was very fortunate actually during my time working with young people in this community that there was a parish councillor that was really passionate about working with young people, really, really passionate. But it was one, and it happened for a period of time, and there was some, even trying to be able to use the local field, and you have to ask the parish council, and sometimes it could be a negative thing because they don't want a big event going on with young people there because they're worried about trouble, etc. When actually there's never been historically any trouble with young people in those kind of events, which can be a real struggle. But actually when you meet that one person that is really passionate, that can really change a community rurally. And actually lots of things then start to happen. So yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you. Who just raised the hand? Was it you, Mary Jane? Fabulous.
Yeah, it's just on that point that yourself and Debs have just said about having somebody there on the local council or whatever champion young people is fantastic, and we need more of that. But what we're doing is working really closely with young people, and we're developing a youth council in the hope that we can have young people on the board and they are part of decision making right through. So we had that meeting last night, and now they're taking over. And I think we need more of that. Young people not only need to be heard, but they need to be listened to and actioned and evidenced against.
And instrumental, not just in a tokenistic way as well. Young people just coming along for the last 10 minutes of a meeting when all the biscuits come out and a cup of tea. No, that's not what we want. We want vocal young people, and recognising the age of young people as well is a challenge, I think, rurally and nationally. But I think recognising that young people actually are up to the age of 25, that young people can take part from a young age all the way through. That actually young people have a right to be heard as well as a voice, and not vilifying young people. And like I say, when you get that amazing person on your parish council, which we're very fortunate that she's still on the parish council and she's pretty amazing, then things change for young people in the local communities. But it's a real battle, right? And should it be? Sorry, we've got some bits in the chat, so let's have a look. Youth Voice for Us is under 30 and as part of the Euro Park Youth Manifesto. Fantastic. Don't worry if you've got to leave, not a problem if people need to go. Okay, guys, fantastic discussion, bro. Let's move on. Thank you. Oh, it's frozen again. It does this sometimes to me. Give it a mo. There we go. So in terms of the rural impact just of county lines then. So I'm just going to read you a little bit from the Children's Commissioner's report. So in February 2019, the Children's Commissioner for England, Anne Longfield, found that there was a lack of research into gangs generally, but also that gangs are often seen as an issue for inner cities and not identified and addressed by rural services. There is a distinct lack of targeted early intervention and education for rural communities. This is part due to the evidence base or lack of it. So Fraser 2018 has found funding is targeted to groups or localities perceived at gang areas, but which are by no means evidenced as such. For rural areas across the UK, that subsequently means little or no funding for specialist intervention. Craig Kelly, a criminology lecturer from Birmingham City University, has said that the data shows knife crime is a national issue, rising faster outside the capital, but politicians, media and academics are far too focused on London. Knife crime is something quite new to rural communities. We are having to learn fast and how to respond. So I just want to kind of gauge your, so that's obviously from the Children's Commissioner's report and the community care report. And what I want to do is kind of get some feedback on what do you think about that? Do you think that that's correct? Are you experiencing young people and the impact of county lines? Or is it something that you've not come across yet? Right.
Yeah, it's massive in Cardiff, where I am. County lines is huge, and knife crime.
And is that in the rural side of Cardiff as well?
I'd say all over South Wales, really. You know, we have a lot of Liverpool gangs, London gangs come over, they groom the children, the young people, I should say, and there was linked to one boy in from Cardiff actually being stabbed 2 years ago, and there was adults involved in that, and the court case is still going on at the moment with our young person, but it's rife.
Yeah,
it's rife over here. It really is, you know. I know young people myself. I've got friends who've got young sons, and you know, I know what they're all about. Their parents haven't got two pence to rub together. They're working around in the flashiest trainers. You know, they're head to toe in latest JD. You know, it's crazy. It really is.
And at the moment, obviously, with the COVID pandemic as well, young people are more accessible. Some young people, not all young people, if they have access to the internet, can be more accessible. Snapchat, right?
Snapchat, I think, is one of the worst platforms ever. Not just for that, for CSE as well. So
exactly. And how can we make the assumption that then, if there is access to internet and young people are able to access it, then this is just an issue that's focused on inner city London? Having worked within, I used to manage an alternative education provision locally as well, and worked with young men predominantly. That were involved in county lines, and actually, because we've got a central rail network that goes directly to London, also goes to Coventry, Birmingham, Leicester, actually our young people were quite accessible in terms of so there was an issue around county lines, and like I say, years ago I went to the National Gangs Conference and was asked why I was there. Because I wasn't a youth worker from a city, I was a rural youth worker. And
the ignorance with the government is astonishing, and quite frankly, they need to give their head a wobble, because if they think it's just cities like London, they're in for a massive shock, and it's just going to get worse. You know, the people who are doing the grooming are going to just think they just constantly get away with it. You know, it's wrong. It's not just London. I know London's the biggest city, and everything's focused on that, but rurally, that's like a massive target for these county lines, and it shouldn't be overlooked.
Young people's vulnerabilities, no, it's absolutely fine, it's great, Gemma, thank you. Young people's vulnerabilities at the moment, so, you know, are changing, so more young people are becoming more vulnerable because of the COVID pandemic, or actually, you know, disengaging from society. We've got, you know, locally, we've had 3 young people that have taken their lives since lockdown from one school. So young people are very struggling mentally, and those that are able to access, you know, are at risk. So it's addressing that with qualified youth workers who know about county lines, being able to work on this issue, and also broadening our minds as youth workers around the vulnerabilities of our young people.
And if they are vulnerable, I mean, the drug dealers will look for those vulnerable traits in a child, you know. And they're the easiest to pick on, and it's so glamorized with the culture that's, you know, with the music and everything that's with the young people today, especially with their Snapchat. It's all about, you know, drug dealing. It is glamorized massively, and if you're vulnerable and you come from a poverty, you've got an older person showing you a bit of you know, respect, saying I've got your back, you know, and I'll be there for you and I'll give you this money, all you got to do is do this. They're just a prime target, you know. It's so sad.
It's a sense of belonging as well for young people, isn't it?
Of course it is. Yeah, it's to be part of something. They feel wanted and they feel like someone's got their back, but it's complete opposite. That's why it's grooming, you know.
Well, thank you. I think as well it's about educating ourselves, because actually we can, within rural communities, we can make an assumption, and it's about the needs of the young people, and it's about educating ourselves further. And like I say, always look out for webinars. Sorry, I went on to mute then for a minute. Look out for webinars that we've got on our website for MYA around county lines. We've got, I believe we've got quite a lot on there around that, and educating yourself on all those things that young people may be facing at the moment. Having those conversations with young people, talking to them about what's going on. Don't assume just because they're in a rural community that this isn't going to happen to them, that they won't be a victim of, you know, any kind of CSE issues or county line issues, but just keeping that, and don't assume that they will be just because they're a young person as well, by the way, because it doesn't happen to every young person. There's a lot of young people that are really savvy out there and that aren't really vulnerable, but maybe just really struggling at the moment because they're quite isolated. So not all young people that are vulnerable are going to get involved in CSE and county lines and various other things, but just keeping that information flowing, talking to young people about it, having sessions with young people around it as well, so that they can be looking out for each other, is always a good way of doing things. Fabulous. Okay, so in terms of the opportunities for youth work in a rural context then, so the opportunities, so there are some, I've just given you a few examples here. I'm going to pop you into breakout rooms again in a minute. So quite often in rural communities, there's a nice community feel. People want to get involved, okay? And that's I enjoyed that community feel in youth in rural communities as well. There can be strong networks of young farmers, and young people can get involved in that even if they're not farmers. There'll be quite often a strong network within those rural communities that sometimes those youth workers don't know about. It's about reaching out and finding out what's going on. I didn't know that young people didn't have to be a farmer to get involved in young farmers. But many years ago I found that out, and actually I've got a friend that works for young farmers, and actually it's a fantastic community for young people, and it's a different interest to get young people outside. There's great outdoor spaces for detached work, sports activities, community events. There's lots of space for young people to be in. So what I want you to do now is go into breakout rooms for 10 minutes, and I want you to discuss your experience of or possible opportunities for youth work in a rural context. So what other opportunities are there that in a rural context that perhaps wouldn't go on anywhere else? Those special moments and that, you know, great outdoor spaces. What else is there in rural communities that's an opportunity for youth work? We've talked about county lines as well. That's an opportunity for youth work if that's going on in your areas. So Steve, the lovely Stephen's going to pop you into your breakout room, so you'll pop off in a second, and that's going to be for another 10 minutes, guys. Are we all clear on what we need to be chatting about? Fabulous. Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have a quick share, because we're nearly at the end of the webinar. We've got one more discussion point at the end of what we discussed in our breakout rooms. So in breakout room 1, we had Gemma's group and Hayley, Mary Jane and Tony. Can you let me know what were your experience of or possible opportunities for youth work in a rural context then? Other than what I've added on there, did you have anything to add? We've got a spokesperson for that group. If not, I'm going to pick on someone, guys.
Yeah, I don't mind saying, I just thought it was a fantastic opportunity for conservation work, because it's one of those sense of achievement things. If you see where you've started, and after an afternoon of everyone working together, not only are you upskilling people with use of tools, you're also getting that sense of achievement. You're getting physical exercise, which is linked to mental health and well-being. So I think, and also you can be leading the community, and if people, you know, this young people do get vilified by older people, but actually they're very switched on about the environment and climate change. And actually, if they can feel they've made an improvement and everyone can see that improvement, it's kind of a double whammy. And things like John Muir Award, you know, you can actually get, if you do something in a context like that, you can actually get a little certificate at the end and put that in your CV. So there's lots of pluses for doing conservation work and also rural areas.
That's fantastic. And young people can take food home. So I had a classroom on an allotment and it was absolutely fantastic. And we went out to the allotment and we cooked our breakfast and we grew our vegetables and we came up with recipes around that. And when we went back into the centre, we then cooked lunch together and we sat and we ate together, and it was about building those social skills around that as well. Sense of pride for young people to take something they've grown home is amazing, to parents and carers, to also donate it to other young people that they know may be struggling to access food banks and things like that. Young people start to have that conversation, they start to have that empathy for each other as well, and it brings young people together. And I've worked with some young males and young females that have been really kind of like, I don't want to do this is rubbish, I don't, throwing spades down, and actually then the sense of achievement that they've got from that pumpkin that they can take home to their little sibling was absolutely beautiful. So that's a really good example. Thank you. Any more examples then? Anything else that you've discussed in your breakout room, from breakout room 1? No? What about breakout room 2 then? We've got Debs in that one. Anybody else? Have we got any more examples of anything else? The opportunities for youth work.
Well, I mean, Ellery came up with an idea of, well, not an idea, but a point about offering work experience to young people. There's quite a, if you put your mind to it, there's quite a range of activities that you could get young people involved with. And Ellery was particularly saying about the idea of getting young people out in the parks and planting seeds and seeing what the rangers do. So it's probably quite a good opportunity to think about, you know, the different types of roles that there are out there, and trying to get young people engaged in that sense.
Absolutely lovely. Yeah, we, NYA work with an organisation called Future Proof Parks, and that is around young people and training volunteers to work with young people in parks as well. So that can help happen rurally and also obviously in cities and urban areas as well. So that's a really nice example of what can happen as well. Yeah, fantastic. Anything else that we've got to add, guys?
I think it's to do with role models as well. You know, the children we work with, well, the young people we work with work experience, get to work with our wardens team. So they have a role model to look at, you know, somebody to inspire to. And I know one of the wardens that we have that work with us now, you know, he used to come to the watch club when he was 7. Wow. He came on our work experience. He's done some other training since, and now he works for the national park, you know, and it's just the whole story comes round in a circle, and it's just lovely, you know. I don't often tell him about the times you were in watch club, Steph, I remember, not to embarrass him, and it makes me feel old as well. But, you know, it's just lovely to hear of the successes from the young people we've worked with.
Absolutely, and to be able to see, for them to see somebody in their community that I did my dissertation many years ago on my local community and rural youth work, and it was called the invisible barrier, because young people told me that there was an invisible barrier. They only got the bus out one way, so they don't often get to see those role models outside of their community unless they're teachers in school, and they don't necessarily think that that's accessible to them. But when that happens inwardly within their communities, it becomes quite a beautiful thing, because you can see them really get, you know, want to achieve that, which is quite lovely. And to have those community members working in a positive way with young people is quite a beautiful thing, right? So fantastic, thank you. Any more examples?
I think one of the things that we talked about as well is that rural communities can be less transient than urban I don't know what that was, urban communities, that people aren't necessarily travelling through, they kind of stop and stay, which that's not always the case. That's a bit of a broad brushstroke, but it's generally true that people are, comes back to the whole generational thing, which can be a bonus. It means that you've got an opportunity to work a bit slower and a bit longer and get to see the changes that happen. Whereas if you're in a more urban area where people are more transient and aren't able to stay there for so long for whatever reason, it's just that just creates more challenges, I think.
Absolutely. Right, thank you very much for that, guys. That's a really good insight. So we are coming to the end now, and I've got just a little discussion point, but it was supposed to be for 15 minutes, but we've talked that much about so much, which has been absolutely brilliant. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you. that I think we should stay in the room and talk together just for the next 5 minutes on this. Okay, so my question that I pose to you then, guys, is how can we as a sector, in terms of youth workers, ensure that young people in rural communities are having their needs met during the COVID pandemic and are not being isolated further? So and I've also put a little note on there, during the COVID pandemic, give some good evidence of youth work practice in rural communities. So how can we ensure that young people that are having their needs met and aren't further isolated? Because at the moment we're all quite isolated, we're at home, right? What are the steps that we can take as youth workers to ensure that that's not happening in our local communities, or as social workers, or in local government? What can we be doing?
We got like online outreach?
Yeah, so online communities, what else can be happening? What kind of online, Gemma? What kind of online work are we talking?
Just cover most youth work thing, you know, mental health, well-being, sexual, I can't think of the
sexual health, in terms of the sexual
health, that's the word, sexual health, yeah. Even job search, things that you would do if you had a provision somewhere, but try, you know, move it online, just for a chat, even just for a chat, just to check on them.
To start with, it's nice just for young people to have someone to talk to at the moment, right?
Yeah,
So create a conversation.
That's the one, yeah.
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 Good. Thank you. It is Friday, guys, so I'm not judging you on this because my teeth have been put back in a few times today.
I got my kids just glaring at me as well. They're putting me
off. Feeling that as well. Don't worry, it's nearly the end. Tell them we won't be long. So as well, what other things can we do that we're ensuring young people are having their needs met during this pandemic then?
I spoke to a youth worker yesterday whilst out on my local walk, and he said he's been having to call a lot of the youth because he's been very concerned that a lot of them are unable to get paid work anywhere. You know, the jobs that they would have had to have pocket money, they no longer have because of COVID. And he spent a lot of time recently just trying to find them part-time work just to have a little bit of pocket money.
Yeah.
So he said he's just constantly, you know, going through website, looking for job opportunities and then calling up the people who come to his groups.
Oh, and yeah, definitely. Young people are nervous about this. Like I said, I spoke to a young person from Bude last night, family friend, who got in touch with me because she knows I'm a youth worker and said, I'm concerned because I'm 16 this year and I'm leaving school and my nearest college is an hour away on a bus, and I have autism and I don't want to get on the bus and I'm worried about this. Is there anything else that I can do? How do I become a teaching assistant if I don't want to go to college? Even knowing those opportunities, that youth worker is creating that conversation and opportunities and pointing young people into the right direction, whereas that would be happening at school. Maybe that's not the focus at the moment. So we've got that nervousness for young people, and that nervousness about future as well. I've certainly got a young person at home myself. One of my children is in year 10, is already nervous about what's happening for them, and just having someone to listen to and talk through those worries of the young people, rather than assuming and putting on loads of information for young people and it's too much. Listening to our young people and creating maybe this kind of environment that young people can chat, those ones that will access. Are any of you going out and doing detached work at the minute? I think somebody said they were earlier on.
Yeah, we are, and I'm just really grateful to the NYA for that because it's because of your guidance really that we were able to do that, and actually that has been really helpful, because as youth workers, not being able to do face-to-face is just, it's so hard. It's what I love doing, and so to be able to do that for those young people who are on the edge, who are going to be out regardless of whether there's a lockdown or not, it's just so, yeah, that's been really important. And I think as well, doing one-to-ones, being able to invite our vulnerable young people to do one-to-ones when other stuff can't happen has been really, really valuable to for those young people who are still, their needs haven't changed. In fact, for some of them, they've got even more challenging. So that for us has been hugely, it's just been a huge privilege as well as beneficial to the young people, but also to us as youth workers. It's kind of kept us going. So I want to thank the NYA for for making that decision and supporting youth work in that way.
It's really great to hear that.
Yeah, and the other thing, I guess, is just about being creative. One of the things that we've done a lot of investment in over the last few years is intergenerational stuff with young people and older people. And a lot of that obviously had to stop face to face, but we worked really hard with the local sixth form that we work with to enable all the volunteering to happen this year through just being really creative and doing stuff that would be able to be still function if we went into a lockdown. And so one of the things that we've done, which we started before and right at the beginning, was we changed one of our projects so that instead of young people supporting older people in an IT session, which is one of the things we did, we started a project called Rainbow Letters of Hope, where young people write to older people to prevent them from being isolated. And I think there's just something about providing an opportunity for young people to feel like they can do something safe and meaningful. And we've actually, through that, been able to engage some young people who are actually on the edge that we've got a relationship with, who we know would really work well in that environment. And so that's been a huge success. Yeah, just watching young people engage with older people in that really safe way. And we've got 2 care homes involved, as well as senior citizens in the community. And so far we've sent over 500 letters. So that's been hugely, wow. It's been a lot of fun. And has been really great to see some quite unexpected successes with some of our young people, actually.
What an amazing achievement. 500 letters is really amazing in terms of that engagement from young people as well. So yeah. Well done, that's fantastic. Mental health is huge at the moment. Young people are struggling. We've got Mental Health Week coming up. I can't remember the exact dates off the top of my head, but we've got Mental Health Week coming up. And getting young people involved in that as well, in terms of ensuring young people are having their needs met. Don't assume because of the pandemic this is what all young people are going through. Let them tell you. Do a needs analysis. Work with young people in that way, in the same way that you've always done. Just because the media is saying this is what we should be doing, some of our young people might be like, I'm absolutely fine, actually, I'm doing really well, but actually all I need is a little bit on careers if you can, because my teacher's focusing on something else right now. Be kind to yourselves as well. Don't burn out. Ensure, you've just said a really good point about going on to online work. It is a very different space to be working with young people. And sometimes you can, I always say this, it can feel a little bit like you're saying a bad joke in a comedy club because everyone's very silent and the cameras can be turned off. It doesn't mean to say they're not engaging though. It's just young people are struggling to kind of adapt to. But also see it as a positive, because this is another space that young people that probably wouldn't have been able to engage with you or wanted to engage with you can engage with you now. So when we return to face, fingers crossed it won't be long, in the way that we want to, and not just the detached way, then things will have another additional resource to work with young people in order to meet their needs. So look at it in the positive way as well. And we're getting into the space that young people want us to be in. So we've come up with lots of things. We've had lots of conversation around your rural youth work, and we've come to the end of the webinar. Thank you, guys. So all I want you to ask now, so there's my email address. It's there for you guys if you've got any further questions. And just if you've got any questions really for me or us as NYA, if there's any information that you need to know.